Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Teresa Brown. Teresa is a registered nurse and author of the New York Times bestseller book, The Shift. She's also a New York Times contributor. Her writings appear on CNN.com, the American Journal of Nursing, and many other scientific and health publications. She's the author of three books, and today we will speak about her latest book, Healing, When a Nurse Becomes a Patient. Teresa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, Teresa, I was speaking to you a minute ago, and you were an oncologist nurse, and I just don't get it because it's a difficult job. It's not well paid. You deal with a lot of suffering and pain and sadness. And, God bless there are people like you in this planet. I mean, how could we survive without someone who cared for the sick? I wonder if we could start by you telling us a little bit about your background. I noticed that you had a PhD in English. So first of all, why is it that you decided to study English? And then what was the shift? What was the thing that made you turn into nursing?
Yeah, this is what I call the $1,000,000 question, because most people feel like, wow, you'd have to give me $1,000,000 to get me to do that. But for me, my dad was a professor. He's retired now. And it just always seemed like such a great job. You get to spend your time with ideas and young, interested students. And so I got my PhD and I taught for 3 years at Tufts in Boston. And then I realized that my dad's dream job was not really my dream job. I liked it, but I wasn't as excited about it as I wanted to be. And then I became a mom and got thrust into this completely other world, especially because when my son was 2.5, I had twin daughters born. So as my husband says, 3 kids under 3, which is a handful. But I also fell in love with what I call the mess of life, sort of, diapers and no sleep and laundry, but also all this joy and love and energy from being with these 3 small beings who were the most important people in my world, including my husband, of course. And then I thought, well, how can I turn this into a job? And basically a friend who's a nurse said, well, you could be a nurse. And it had never crossed my mind. But then I looked into it and I found out that you can have a PhD and become a nurse. And then I had to go back to school to do science classes so that I could do what's called an accelerated nursing program, where you get the science classes you need, and then you get the nursing degree in a year and a half, depending on where you go. So I did it. I never looked back. I actually really liked the science classes. I liked how concrete they were, and became a nurse, and then went into oncology for reasons I didn't fully understand until later. But there's a lot of cancer in my mom's family. So I'd always been intrigued by oncology and frightened of it. And why people do this work, for me and the nurses I worked with, there's such a richness to that environment. It's so emotionally rich, it's intellectually rich, and that the problems people can have are complicated. They're interesting and also terrible, of course, but it's a very deep field. And I learned a lot about life from it, as in value the present, value the people you love. And then when I was diagnosed with cancer, I was, you might say, primed to really have those lessons ingrained in me. But also, I was very rudely awakened to how really terrifying it is to have cancer, which, as a nurse taking care of cancer patients, I didn't realize that at all, how really, really hard it must have been on my patients. So I think I was a good nurse and cared for people well, but coming back now, I would care for them differently.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So you were an English teacher, and then you said that you became a mom, and of course, this only happens to half of the population.
Right.
So I wonder if you could tell, because my podcast focus a little bit on money matters. Why is it that you find that as a moment that you had to put your ongoing career at that time teaching English on pause to take care of your child?
That is a great question. And here in the US, we resist having the obvious answer to that. So basically, my husband and I talked about it, and financially, I could have worked as an adjunct faculty member, but I would have made so little money doing that that everything I made would have gone to pay for the childcare we would have needed so that I could do the job. And that just didn't make sense to us. And also, I never thought I would be the kind of person who would want to be at home with my kids. And I found it just incredibly enriching to do that. But that's me personally. And I will make a pitch for, in this country, having paid childcare like a lot of other industrialized countries manage to do. And for me, it wasn't so much that I felt like I had to give up my job. It was kind of this whole process of learning more about myself and finding this softer side. But if there were more financial support for working mothers and for young parents, I could have made a different decision. I could have worked part-time. I mean, I remember being really angry at the time, like, why can't people work part-time? Why don't they let moms with young children work part-time so that, you don't have to have a 8, 9, 10-hour day away from your kids. You can work some and be some with your kids. But we are so rigid in this country about work and the importance of work and the importance of making money. But then at the same time, the importance of being home with your kids. And we Americans are not so great at compromise as is really playing out now in this country.
And just to put things in perspective, I live in the province of Quebec in Canada, and here a parent pays the $10 Canadian per day to have someone taking care of their child while they work. So that probably is like $8 US. I don't know, $7 per day for having your child taken care of at a professional center. So yeah, it puts a lot of American family at a disadvantage that you have to make this decision of, do I work or do I take care of my child? But there's nothing in between. So yeah, that's quite unfortunate.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay,
Right.
so you made the decision to become a nurse, and you went through an accelerated program. But let's say you just finished high school and you decide to become a nurse. What are the education requirements for a person to become a registered nurse?
Oh, great question. So there are a few different tracks available. You can get an associate's degree from a community college. That's a 2-year degree. There are hospitals that have nursing programs that I think also run roughly about 2 years. Those are called diploma programs. And then the college degree, the BSN, the bachelor's, takes 4 years. And there's data that shows, in general, when you have bachelor's trained nurses, you get better care. But this is such a toxic topic to bring up with nurses, as you might imagine, because no one wants to be told, oh, hey, if you'd gone to school for 2 more years, you'd actually be a better nurse than you are now. And I certainly worked with lots of nurses who were diploma nurses, who had associate's degrees, who were great nurses. I do feel it would be great for the American healthcare system if every nurse had to have a bachelor's degree, but I also think then we would need government assistance or financial aid. And I do mean aid, I don't mean loans, to help these men and women who want to get the college degree get it. Because a lot of people, they can only afford 2 years of school. You're like, why should I go to school for 4 years when I could go to school for 2, when it's so expensive here in the US? So if we want to have a bachelor's trained nursing force, we need to help make that possible. But just to make it clear, I have worked with great nurses of all education levels. This is not about me saying I'm a better nurse because I'm better educated. It's just, I think it would be great to have everyone have the same standard and the same training and the same educational background.
But in your book, you mentioned that there are frictions between the nurses who have 2-year education, who went through 2 years education program versus those 4 years. So, I mean, I can see once we are in the wild, in the workforce, I mean, the task at hand is to take care of the patients. It's not whether you study 4 years or 2 years. So how does this friction develop, and what's the underlying reason, the real reason for this friction?
That's a really good question. And my sense is that there's some defensiveness or anxiety on the part of the nurses who didn't get the college degree, that nurses with college degrees are going to come in and say, well, I've got a bachelor's, and so I know more than you. And I don't know that that happens, but then again, I haven't heard of that happening. But maybe it does in subtle ways, but maybe that also is a symptom of class issues here in the US. That distinction between if you went to community college or you went to a 4-year college, we're always very much focused on status, right? And I think the nurses with the 2-year degrees sort of automatically feel of lower status, which is unfortunate. I mean, I never saw any nurse I worked with treat someone differently because, well, we have college degrees and you don't. But I understand that anxiety about being treated that way. And you're making me think, if everyone had the same level of education, then you would just eliminate that problem, right?
Wow. It would seem to me that something that would be more worthy of a status would be how many lives have I saved, or how many patients feel that they feel comfort and love and empathy from my care. That I think that would be a better standard of status as how many years of college did I have, but anyway.
Right. How well do I understand what's going on, and how well am I able to, say, put a nasogastric tube down someone's throat into the right place? I mean, there are these technical skills that are really important and that I was pretty good at. I didn't get that much chance to do them, but I wouldn't say I was great at all of them, not because I have a college degree, but the point is, yes, are you empathic? Are you good with your hands? Are you good at thinking through and solving problems? Are you good at getting on the phone and being an advocate? There's so many skills involved, and to reduce the talent of nursing to, do you have a 2-year or 4-year degree, is mistaken, let's just say.
So your branch of nursing is oncology, but for someone who doesn't know anything about nursing as a career, how many branches there are? Is there a branch for each particular sickness, or how does it work?
That is another great question. Yeah, as many branches of physicians as there are also as many branches of nursing. So you have nurses who only work in the operating room. You have nurses who work in the emergency department, nurses who work in intensive care. But then there are transplant nurses, so heart transplant, kidney transplant, liver transplant, oncology, cancer patients, or I was going to say orthopod, that's what we call them, the orthopedic nurses who work with fractures and other kinds of trauma. And then there are general nurses called med-surg nurses who, say you're on a regular hospital floor, they're kind of like generalists. They could get a variety of patients. And then there are nurses who work in labs. So nurses who work in the GI lab doing colonoscopies, nurses who work in the cardiac catheterization lab doing tests and saving people who are having heart attacks. There are nurses who specialize in pediatrics, and they only work with kids. There are nurses who work in all kinds of clinics. There are research nurses. So sometimes we would have nurses who worked on the floor in oncology, and they would transition to doing research. So then they're part of a certain physician group's research project. And they would come over and collect tubes of blood and get data from us. And, but they weren't actually providing direct patient care as part of what they were doing. And then there's public health nurses, right? I mean, we heard a lot about that during COVID. Not as many public health nurses as there used to be, but yeah, you can be out in the community doing STD testing or HIV testing, or talking with people about how to prevent HIV, trying to get people to take COVID tests. So there are so many options. And I've actually had a couple of doctors say to me kind of enviously, yeah, if you don't like what you're doing, you can just do something else. But if you've trained for years to be an orthopedist, you can't just decide you suddenly want to be a psychiatrist. Or you can, but you'd have to go back to school for a while and do lots of other work that you probably don't want to do. But for nurses, it's easy enough to switch around if you can find a place willing to give you that training.
Right. Well, I have had more than one podcast in which I have interviewed a doctor or a healthcare provider, and they have emphasized that when there is empathy in the job, the patients recuperate faster, better. The caregiver feels better about him or herself. The hospital or the facility makes more money. Yet it seems that there is a lack of empathy in the healthcare system. So what's the cause? Being that there are all this positive aspect of having empathy for the sick, why people just ignore this such an important fact of medicine?
Yeah, great question. And that is why I wrote this book, because I saw such an empathy gap between what patients need and what they get from the system. Even when the system is filled with people who care a lot, there still feels like this huge empathy gap just because of how people get pushed through the system, and there's not good communication, and they aren't always informed about what's happening, or they have to wait way too long, and all the problems that anyone who's been a patient is familiar with. So we have this empathy gap. And then you ask exactly the right question: why? And in healing, I also quote research that shows, yes, more compassionate care saves money, makes things better for everyone. Hospitals in the US are all about their brand, right? Well, just think if you could say, highest scores on empathy, everybody's going to want to go to your hospital. So I would love for CEOs and hospital administrators to read my book and think, we need to make this a priority because it will benefit our patients. And what's happened, at least in the US, is there is so much focus on squeezing every last dime out of every person that's what gets rewarded. And also, are you doing your documentation the right way? Because that's what we get judged on more than the actual care, which is a whole nother problem. But that message needs to come from the top. Hey, we need to make people feel cared for. And what I show in the book is it's not expensive. You don't need a chief compassion officer, although if people want to do that, they can. You don't need a patient compassion initiative, although if you want to do that, you can. But where I went for radiation oncology, it was just old-fashioned politeness. They were very clear about the expectations. They showed me a video of what was going to happen during my treatment. And unfailingly, people made me feel like an individual, like a human being. I went 5 days a week for 4 weeks. Every single time the techs called me into my appointment, it was, hey, Teresa, how are you doing today? This does not take a lot of time to say hello, to be civil, to recognize someone else's humanity. And the best thing of all was the waiting room had a TV on, and I'm not a big TV person, but also I would show up and a game show would be finishing, and it just made me really anxious. I don't know why. But so I said, can we turn the TV off? And they said, we can't do that because some patients really like it, but you can sit out in the hallway. And so they had these comfortable chairs, and I sat out in the hallway, and every single time one of the techs came out and got me, never said, wow, yeah, you have to sit out here again. Oh yeah, why are you so important? You have to sit out here. You know, there was nothing like that to say, you are slightly inconveniencing us here, and we're going to let you know that that's annoying. Instead, it was, this is what's happening. And just very matter of fact, it's not that hard to be kind, but the message needs to come from the top. This matters. We've got to see our patients as people. We've got to make them feel cared for.
Well, being that you have been in both sides of the bed as a
Yes.
nurse and as a patient, what would you have done different as a nurse, and how would you have been also a better patient?
Yeah, as a nurse, I would have seen my patients' humanity much better. So I tell a story in the book of a patient who had follow-up chemotherapy. He'd had his initial 2 months, but needed to come in for follow-up, and started at our outpatient center across the street. There was this whole protocol. You're going to come in early, you're going to get started early, you're going to get out early. Great. So they started him over there, sent him over to us. He was supposed to have a pump for his intravenous fluids and be started on the fluids, but he wasn't. Okay, that's fine. I'll call and get a pump. And I called supply, and they said, we have no intravenous pumps. And people should understand, this is like a restaurant saying we're out of plates. Like, that just doesn't happen. And I thought, okay, that's weird, and called back in half an hour. Yeah, I really need that pump. Yeah, we don't have any pumps. And it just kept going like that. And I had 3 other patients. I was really busy with them. But the patient would come to the door of his room and give me these dirty looks. And there was nothing I could do. Sometimes I would have left the floor, gone to other floors, found an IV pump for this patient, even if I had to like steal it from somewhere else. But that day I just was too busy. I didn't have it in me. And I thought, well, you know, as annoyances go, this isn't so bad, right? His chemotherapy is going to start. It's not going to start when he wanted, but okay. But once I had been a patient, I really thought about that and how terrible that must have been, because he trusted us. We told him, you're going to show up and we're going to get this done and you're going to leave early as a result. And all of that fell apart. And he must have just felt like, I can't trust these people anymore. I can't believe a word they say. And I would never have understood how important that feeling of trust is, and how it can be just broken by this, you know, too huge system breaking down in some strange way. I'm glad I know that now. I wish I had known it then, but you know, if other people read the book who are clinicians and it helps them understand why in a moment like that is so crucial, then I will have done good work.
Well, yeah, your book is helps me. It's almost like a peephole that allows me to see what really goes on into the field of nursing and how patients are treated, and the love and care that people, the health providers should and do have in this field. But who's this book for? Is it for people who have, for other people in the industry, or people who have friends and family who have gone through a medical process? Who's your main audience?
I would say both. And you had asked me in the previous question, what would I have done differently as a patient? And so I've talked about how I wish people who stand at the side of the bed, what they will learn from the book. But as a patient, what I learned and what I hope other people will learn is to speak up, which I did. I did speak up, but I wasn't so comfortable with doing that because I had seen as a nurse, well, it's the patients who go along to get along, who just kind of let care happen to them. That's the ideal patient. And then at some point I realized that just doesn't work for me. And I would really like patients and family members to read the book and take away from it. It is okay to ask questions. If you do not understand something, say, I still don't understand. Can you please explain that to me one more time? To say, could you give me something written down that I can take home with me? Also, why do I have to wait so long for this? I mean, I definitely got into sort of pushing and shoving matches with doctors, trying to get in the door on time. Why do I have to wait like this? That's another great question to ask. And you can be polite and be civil, but just insist.
Right.
Getting a cancer diagnosis is terrifying. You don't want someone to tell you, oh, well, yeah, our next appointment is in 2 weeks. That's 2 weeks you have to spend thinking, I have this cancer and nothing's happening to it. And also the danger is that person just going to give up on the system? Maybe, the system is not making people feel held, like we've got you. And we hear a lot of talk about nurse navigators who help cancer patients go through the process and cancer centers. But I had none of that. I know some people do. They do get help from the center where they go, but I had none of that. A lot of patients have none of that. You feel like there's no one looking out for you. There's no one who even gives you a sort of checklist of what needs to happen next and make sure that you follow up on it. So are you going to be one of those people who's quote unquote lost a follow-up? And we had a patient come in when I was a nurse who was supposed to get treatment for skin cancer and for a variety of reasons didn't get that treatment, then came back to the hospital when she was covered with these tumors. It was really horrible. And now that I've been a patient, I wonder, well, did anyone follow up with her, or did she just kind of drop off the clinical map and that was it? And then came back basically so sick, there was no way we were going to be able to help her.
Well, I have like a million questions, but at the same time, I don't want to abuse of your time. Just one thing that I'm just having a hard time placing in my mind, which is the United States is one of the most has one of the most advanced healthcare facilities in the world. At the same time, it's one of the less affordable, and compared to other countries, industrialized countries, it seems to be lagging in regards to when you compare the cost of healthcare versus the benefit. And of course, your field of expertise is not economics, but I don't know. What do you think could be done differently? I mean, I invest in what is it? It's called index investor, so I know that I have some investment in the healthcare industry as well, and I just cannot imagine, patients are falling to the wayside because hospitals are looking for the how to process and do things the most cost-effective way. But at the same time, people are being left behind, and that's not happening in other countries. So I just don't know how to put all that together. And I don't assume you know too, because you are a nurse, you are not an economist or financial analysis. But I wonder if you just have some perspective that you could share with us.
I do. And the main problem with the US healthcare system is it has gotten so focused on making money. So turning a profit and then accumulating greater and greater profits. So a few decades ago, there were no healthcare companies in the US that were on what's called the Fortune 500 index of the wealthiest companies. And now there are several. So that tells you something. And of course, hospitals have to make money, people have to get paid, drugs have to be bought, equipment has to be purchased, etc. But the focus now seems to be so much on just making money to make money. There are hospitals that have in the US that have been bought by venture capital companies. They're just seen as investment properties. Many hospital systems with CEOs that make millions of dollars and other managers, pharmaceutical companies getting rich, all kinds of middlemen, middle people maybe,
Yeah.
like these organizations called pharmacy benefits managers that were introduced to keep prescription costs down, but now they siphon money out of all these different parties. So I think the American public and the general public, maybe if Canadians also care about this, is not aware of just how much money in our healthcare system is going to all of this profit making, including not just the money, but there's a growing small army of people who process all this paperwork, who answer the insurance questions, who are the ones who say, no, you can't have that treatment. Yes, you can have that treatment. And all those people could be focused on improving the quality of care, the compassion in care, but instead they're all about moving money around. And the idea was, because we're Americans, we believe so strongly in capitalism, right? Capitalism always gives you the best system, but that's not true in healthcare. It has not worked out that way because most healthcare systems are essentially local monopoly systems, right? And some of them are getting bigger, but wherever they are, they're a kind of monopoly system. There may be 2 hospitals, 3 hospitals, 10 hospitals, but people, it's not like you can say, hey, I'm in New York, but there's this hospital in California, I'm just going to go there. It would be really expensive. And, that just doesn't happen. So capitalism has not exerted the forces of competition in healthcare the way that in theory it would. Instead, it's just channeled more and more money into enriching people, and that money and effort comes out of the system. So I'm not an economist, but I've thought about this a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it figures that if I produce widgets, one of my concerns is how can I reduce costs, or how can I make the biggest profit, just producing widgets, plastic, or metal, whatever, but taking care of a human life is a different thing. The main concern is how much money can I squeeze out of this patient, but how can we help this patient get better to go back to a regular life? And from the government's perspective, if you have healthy citizens, then that also runs the economy and the whole place a lot better. So I maybe it's a place where government should get more involved, but then you have this capitalist wave
Yeah.
flag wavers saying no, we don't want to be like Canada or any of these socialist countries, because they're just not gonna take care of the rich just as well as we do. But not everyone is rich, and then there is regular individuals who just get sick as well, and it runs better at the economy, and the city runs better when you have healthy people.
Yes, it sounds like you and I agree. Yes. Yes, I completely agree with you. And think about all the supply chain issues we keep hearing about, right? So, I'll just, so there's a paper shortage, paper shortage. So there are books that are being delayed. There's a magazine I'm going to have an article in that was going to come out in May, and now it's coming out in June because of the paper shortage. All right, this is not the end of the world, right? But if you have a nursing shortage or an IV pump shortage or a drug shortage, then suddenly people's lives are on the line. And so we need different standards. It can't just be pure capitalism.
Right.
And you're right, that's where government comes in, but then you get, right, people who really, really don't like that solution.
Wow. You know, I'm a capitalist, but I I am in favor of the government having a bigger role in healthcare. Teresa, I'm not going to hold you anymore, but I'm so grateful for your time. I wonder if you could tell us one more time the title of the book and where can the listeners follow the work that you're doing?
Yeah, thank you. So the book is called Healing When a Nurse Becomes a Patient. It's available wherever books are sold. You can find me at teresabrownrn.com, and it's Teresa, Theresa, brownrn.com. And if you want a signed copy and you order from the City of Asylum bookstore here in Pittsburgh, they will send out a signed copy to you. So,
and the links to that are in the website, so I can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, they're on my website. It's Healing, Buy It Now. Yeah, it should be the landing page.
Okay, all those links will be in the show notes. Teresa, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. It was a pleasure. Thank you.